Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Anna. Today I have a new story for you, called The Language Exchange. It's about a man who decides to learn a new language, and discovers that learning a language often means learning much more than just words. As always, just relax and listen, and let's begin. Mark Coleman was 29 years old, and he had just received exciting news at work. His company was opening a new office in Mexico City, and they wanted Mark to help lead the project for the first year. Mark felt thrilled about the opportunity, but also nervous about one significant problem. Despite studying Spanish briefly in high school over a decade earlier, he barely remembered more than a few basic phrases. "You'll pick it up quickly once you're actually living there," his manager reassured him during the meeting where they offered him the position. Mark wasn't so confident. He remembered struggling badly with Spanish class as a teenager, never quite understanding the grammar, always feeling embarrassed whenever the teacher asked him to speak aloud in front of classmates. He remembered specifically one class presentation where he completely forgot his prepared lines halfway through, standing silently in front of his classmates for what felt like an eternity, an experience that left him feeling permanently discouraged about language learning in general. That evening, Mark called his older sister, who had spent a semester studying abroad in Spain during university and still spoke Spanish reasonably well. "I don't know if I can actually do this," he admitted. "What if I get there and can't even order food properly?" "You'll be fine," his sister said confidently. "The key is just practicing regularly, even a little bit each day. It adds up faster than you'd think. And honestly, people appreciate the effort, even when your grammar isn't perfect." Still, he had 4 months before his planned move, and he decided he wanted to arrive in Mexico City with at least some basic conversational ability, rather than starting completely from zero. That evening, searching online for effective ways to learn quickly, Mark discovered something called a language exchange app, designed to connect people learning different languages so they could practice together, each helping the other with their target language. Mark downloaded the app curiously, created a simple profile explaining his situation, and began searching for someone learning English who might want to practice Spanish with him in return. Within a few hours, Mark received a message from a woman named Sofia, living in Guadalajara, Mexico, who was learning English to help with her career as a graphic designer, hoping eventually to work with international clients. Her English, though clearly still developing, was considerably better than Mark's non-existent Spanish, and her message felt warm and friendly. "Hello. I saw you are moving to Mexico soon," Sofia had written. "I would like to help you practice Spanish, if you can help me practice English too. We can use video call, maybe once each week?" Mark felt a small flutter of nervousness reading this message, the same nervousness he remembered from Spanish class years earlier. But he reminded himself this was exactly why he needed practice, and he replied enthusiastically, suggesting they schedule their first call for the following weekend. When Saturday finally arrived, Mark sat nervously in front of his laptop, waiting for the video call to connect. When Sofia's face appeared on the screen, smiling warmly, Mark felt his nervousness ease slightly. "Hi. Nice to meet you," Sofia said, her English clear though noticeably accented. "Should we start in English, then switch to Spanish halfway through?" "That sounds perfect," Mark agreed, relieved by her clear, organized approach. Their first conversation felt somewhat awkward, both of them slightly shy with a stranger, but gradually the conversation relaxed as they discussed simple topics, their jobs, their families, their reasons for learning a new language. Sofia explained that she had been studying English independently for almost 2 years, mostly through watching movies with subtitles and reading simple articles online, but she felt her speaking ability lagged noticeably behind her reading comprehension. "I understand much more than I can say," Sofia admitted. "It's strange, this problem. Like the words get stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth." Mark laughed, immediately recognizing exactly the same feeling from his own attempts to remember basic Spanish phrases. "That's exactly how I feel too," he said. "I know I learned this stuff years ago, but it's like it's all locked away somewhere I can't quite reach." When they eventually switched to Spanish, Mark's nervousness returned immediately, his mind suddenly blank despite having practiced simple phrases earlier that same day. ¿Cómo estás? Mark managed, his pronunciation clumsy and hesitant. Sofia smiled encouragingly. Muy bien, gracias. Why too? Mark understood the question but froze, unable to remember the correct response quickly enough. Sofia, noticing his struggle, gently switched back to English. It's okay, take your time. Everyone feels nervous at the beginning. I still feel nervous speaking English sometimes, even after years of studying. This small reassurance helped Mark relax considerably, and by the end of their first hour-long call, though his Spanish remained clumsy and basic, he felt encouraged rather than defeated. Mark also started keeping a small notebook specifically to track his progress, writing down new vocabulary after each session, along with occasional notes about mistakes he wanted to remember not to repeat. Looking back through this notebook months later, he found it strangely satisfying to see how his early entries, filled with basic greetings and simple present tense verbs, gradually gave way to more complex sentences and genuinely useful, practical phrases. Sofia's family also became gently involved in Mark's learning journey over time. During one call, Sofia's younger brother briefly appeared in the background, curious about the English-speaking stranger his sister spoke with every week, and ended up joining the conversation for a few minutes, practicing his own limited English while Mark attempted responding in Spanish, both of them laughing at their mutual struggles. Sofia's mother, passing by during another call, insisted on sharing her family's recipe for a traditional dish after overhearing Mark mention his interest in Mexican food, patiently repeating ingredient names slowly so Mark could understand and write them down properly. Over the following weeks, Mark and Sofia continued their weekly video calls, each session gradually building Mark's confidence and vocabulary. Sofia proved to be a patient, encouraging teacher, never making Mark feel embarrassed about his mistakes, instead gently correcting him and explaining grammar rules clearly, often using simple examples from everyday life. During their third call, Mark made an embarrassing mistake that became a running joke between them for weeks afterward. Attempting to say he was embarrassed about something, using a word that sounded similar in both languages, Mark accidentally used the Spanish word embarazada, not realizing this actually meant pregnant rather than embarrassed. Sofia burst out laughing, quickly explaining the mistake. That's actually one of the most common mistakes English speakers make, she reassured him, still laughing. You're definitely not the first person to accidentally announce their pregnancy while trying to apologize for something. Determined not to repeat this particular mistake in an actual professional setting later, Mark created a small list of dangerous similar-sounding words, reviewing them occasionally before important practice sessions. Sofia found this habit endearing, occasionally adding her own suggestions of commonly confused word pairs she had encountered from other English-learning friends over the years, turning what began as an embarrassing mistake into an unexpectedly useful study tool. Mark laughed along, genuinely embarrassed now for real reasons, but grateful the mistake happened during a private practice session rather than during an actual important conversation in Mexico City later. A similar funny mistake happened a few weeks later, when Mark attempted to describe a meal he had cooked over the weekend, trying to say the chicken was delicious. Instead, using a word that sounded almost identical, he accidentally told Sofia the chicken was extremely old rather than extremely tasty, confusing his adjectives completely. Wait, you cooked old chicken on purpose? Sofia asked, genuinely confused for a moment before realizing the mistake and laughing loudly. I think you mean delicioso, not anciano. That would be a very different dinner story. These small, funny mistakes, rather than discouraging Mark, gradually became something he looked forward to during their calls, small moments of genuine laughter that made the entire learning process feel considerably less intimidating than his memories of formal classroom Spanish lessons years earlier. As weeks passed, Mark also began supplementing his weekly calls with Sofia by studying independently between sessions, using language apps, watching simple Spanish videos online, and practicing vocabulary flashcards during his lunch breaks at work. Slowly, noticeably, his confidence grew alongside his actual ability. However, around the 6th week, Mark experienced a significant dip in motivation. A particularly difficult grammar lesson about Spanish verb conjugations left him feeling completely overwhelmed, convinced he would never properly master the complicated system of verb endings that changed depending on who was performing an action. That particular lesson had involved Sofia patiently explaining the differences between several past tense forms, each used in slightly different situations depending on whether an action was completed, ongoing, or habitual. Mark tried taking careful notes during the call, but by the end of the hour, his notebook page looked like a confusing mess of crossed-out attempts and question marks. "I don't think I'm cut out for this," Mark admitted honestly during their call that week, genuinely discouraged. "There's just too much to remember. Every verb changes differently depending on who's speaking, when it happened, whether it's finished or continuing. My brain feels completely overloaded." Sofia listened patiently before responding. "I understand completely," she said. "English has its own confusing rules too, remember? Phrasal verbs still confuse me constantly. Look up, look after, look forward to, completely different meanings, same basic words. Every language feels overwhelming at some point. The key isn't understanding everything perfectly right away. It's continuing anyway, a little at a time." "How did you get past that feeling?" Mark asked, genuinely curious. "Honestly, I stopped trying to understand every single rule before using the language," Sofia said. "I started just trying to communicate, mistakes and all, and let the grammar improve naturally over time through practice. Perfect grammar can wait. Communication can't." Mark thought about this advice for several days afterward, gradually changing his own study habits as a result. Rather than spending an entire evening reviewing conjugation charts, he began instead watching short Spanish videos about topics he genuinely found interesting: cooking channels, simple news segments, even children's cartoons designed for young native speakers, absorbing natural rhythms and common phrases through repeated exposure rather than pure memorization. "I actually noticed a real difference within just a couple weeks," Mark told Sofia during their next call. "I stopped translating every sentence in my head first. Sometimes the Spanish just comes out now, without me consciously building it word by word." "That's exactly the goal," Sofia said, genuinely pleased. "That's when a language really starts to feel like yours, instead of something foreign you're constantly fighting against." Encouraged by Sofia's own honest struggles with English, Mark decided to continue, adjusting his approach slightly. Instead of trying to memorize every grammar rule perfectly, he focused more on practical, commonly used phrases he would actually need during his upcoming move, gradually building genuine, practical confidence rather than theoretical perfection. Their weekly calls also gradually expanded beyond pure language practice into genuine cultural exchange. Sofia enjoyed explaining Mexican traditions and customs to Mark, describing regional foods he should try, holidays he might experience during his time there, and small everyday cultural differences that guidebooks rarely mentioned, like the importance of greeting people warmly before jumping straight into business topics, something quite different from Mark's usual direct communication style at his current job. In return, Mark found himself explaining aspects of his own culture that Sofia found curious or unfamiliar, comparing holiday traditions, workplace customs, and everyday habits between their two countries. These conversations, though technically outside their original language learning purpose, became some of Mark's favorite parts of their weekly calls, deepening their growing friendship considerably beyond simple language practice. Around the 8th week, Sofia invited Mark to join a larger group video call she regularly participated in, a monthly gathering of several language exchange partners from different countries, practicing together in a relaxed, informal setting. Mark felt nervous about this larger, more public practice opportunity, but Sofia encouraged him warmly. "It's really casual," she reassured him. "Everyone is learning, everyone makes mistakes. It might actually help you feel more comfortable speaking in front of multiple people, which will be useful once you're actually living in Mexico." Mark agreed nervously, joining the group call the following weekend. The group included people from Brazil, Japan, France, and Germany, all learning different combinations of languages together, creating a friendly, supportive atmosphere despite the language barriers and occasional confusion. A cheerful woman from Japan named Yuki, learning both Spanish and English simultaneously, made everyone laugh, describing her own recent mix-up between similar-sounding Spanish and English words. A quiet man from Germany named Klaus, surprisingly skilled at Spanish already, patiently helped correct pronunciation whenever someone struggled, always doing so kindly, never making anyone feel foolish. The group rotated through different small conversation topics together, taking turns attempting simple stories in their target languages while others listened supportively. During this group session, Mark found himself genuinely enjoying attempting simple conversations in Spanish with people other than Sofia, discovering that his practice with her had actually prepared him better than he realized. Though he still made frequent mistakes, he found himself less afraid of making them, understanding now that mistakes were simply an expected, normal part of the entire learning process. "You did really well today," Sofia told him afterward, genuinely impressed. "I could see your confidence growing throughout the whole call." As Mark's departure date for Mexico City approached, his weekly calls with Sofia became increasingly focused on practical, real-world scenarios he anticipated needing, ordering food at restaurants, discussing work projects with colleagues, navigating everyday situations like grocery shopping or taking taxis. Sofia even helped him practice a short introduction speech he planned to give during his first team meeting in Mexico City, patiently correcting his pronunciation until it sounded natural and confident. They spent an entire session simply role-playing different everyday situations, Sofia pretending to be a taxi driver asking for directions, then a grocery store cashier asking if he needed a bag, then a new colleague asking simple questions about his background. Each scenario felt slightly awkward at first, performing these small imaginary conversations over video call, but Mark found the repeated practice genuinely useful, building automatic, comfortable responses rather than needing to translate every sentence carefully in his head. "The goal isn't perfect grammar during these conversations," Sofia reminded him during one particularly detailed practice session. "It's comfort. You want your mouth to just know what to say, without your brain needing to think too hard about it first." During their final call before Mark's move, Sofia shared something that genuinely moved him. "I want to thank you too," she said. "Teaching you has actually helped my own English improve significantly. Explaining grammar rules to you forced me to understand my own English mistakes much better. This has honestly been valuable for both of us, not just you." Mark hadn't fully considered this mutual benefit before, always slightly embarrassed about needing so much help himself, but Sofia's genuine gratitude helped him see their exchange differently, as a true partnership rather than simply Sofia doing him a favor. When Mark finally arrived in Mexico City, nervous but genuinely excited, he found his 4 months of practice had prepared him considerably better than he initially expected. His first few days involved plenty of awkward, imperfect conversations, taxi drivers speaking too quickly for him to fully understand, restaurant menus containing unfamiliar vocabulary, but overall, Mark found himself capable of basic, functional communication, something that would have felt impossible before starting his language exchange with Sofia. On his very first evening, exhausted from traveling, Mark decided to find a small restaurant near his temporary apartment rather than ordering delivery through an app. Standing nervously at the counter, he managed to order a simple meal entirely in Spanish, stumbling only slightly over a few words, and felt genuinely proud when the server understood him completely without needing to switch to English. A few days later, Mark needed to take a taxi across the city for an orientation meeting, and successfully explained his destination to the driver, even managing a short, simple conversation about the weather and traffic during the ride. Small victories like these, seemingly minor to an outside observer, felt enormous to Mark, each one building his confidence steadily. During his second week in Mexico City, Mark faced his biggest test yet, leading his first official team meeting, partially conducted in Spanish for the benefit of local colleagues who preferred discussing certain topics in their native language. Mark felt his heart racing beforehand, remembering Sofia's patient coaching sessions, practicing this exact scenario weeks earlier. Standing before his new colleagues, Mark delivered his prepared introduction in careful, though imperfect, Spanish. Several colleagues smiled encouragingly, appreciating his genuine effort despite occasional grammatical mistakes. He explained his background, his role on the project, and his genuine excitement about working alongside the local team, pausing occasionally to search for the correct word, but never completely losing his train of thought the way he feared he might. After his introduction, one colleague, an older man named Roberto, approached him warmly during the coffee break afterward. "Your Spanish is impressive for someone who just arrived," Roberto told him, genuinely complimentary. "Most people from the head office don't bother trying at all. They expect everyone here to just speak English for their convenience." "I had a lot of help," Mark admitted honestly. "A friend back home spent months practicing with me before I moved." "Well, it shows," Roberto said. "It makes a real difference to us, honestly, seeing someone make the effort. It shows respect." This comment stayed with Mark throughout the following weeks, understanding more clearly than ever exactly why his months of practice with Sofia had mattered so significantly, not just for his own convenience, but for how genuinely and respectfully he could now connect with the colleagues around him. Mark felt an overwhelming sense of pride hearing Roberto's words, remembering clearly his own nervous, clumsy first attempts months earlier during that very first video call with Sofia. He immediately messaged her that evening, excitedly sharing the story of his successful meeting. "I'm so proud of you," Sofia replied. "This is exactly why we started, remember? Not perfect Spanish, just confident, functional Spanish. You've genuinely accomplished that." Even after Mark's move, he and Sofia continued their weekly calls, though now with a slightly different purpose. Rather than focusing purely on basic vocabulary and grammar, their conversations naturally evolved into genuine friendship, discussing their respective lives, sharing cultural differences they noticed, occasionally still correcting each other's persistent grammar mistakes, but mostly simply enjoying each other's company across the distance. 6 months after his move, Mark felt confident enough in his Spanish abilities to attend a local community event without any nervousness at all, a neighborhood festival celebrating a regional holiday he had learned about specifically through conversations with Sofia. He spent the entire evening chatting comfortably with neighbors, trying unfamiliar traditional foods, feeling genuinely, completely integrated into his new community in a way he hadn't imagined possible when he first nervously downloaded that language exchange app months earlier. The festival filled the street outside his apartment with colorful decorations, music, and the smell of freshly cooked food from small stalls set up by neighboring families. An older woman running one of the food stalls, noticing Mark's genuine interest, patiently explained the traditional dish she was preparing, and Mark understood almost every word without needing to ask her to repeat anything. He spent nearly an hour talking with a group of neighbors he had only briefly greeted before, learning about their families, sharing a little about his own life back home, feeling, for the first time since arriving, like a genuine part of the neighborhood rather than simply a foreign visitor passing through. Walking home that night, full from unfamiliar delicious food and genuinely tired from hours of continuous Spanish conversation, Mark felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, remembering clearly how impossible this exact evening would have seemed to him just 8 months earlier. Reflecting on his journey during a later conversation with Sofia, Mark realized something significant. "I thought I was just learning Spanish," he told her. "But honestly, I feel like I learned so much more than that. Patience, mostly. And that it's okay to sound silly sometimes, if it means you're actually trying." "That's true for learning almost anything," Sofia agreed thoughtfully. "Not just languages." A year after their very first awkward video call, Sofia mentioned during one of their regular conversations that she had successfully landed an international design contract, communicating confidently with English-speaking clients for the very first time in her career, a professional milestone she directly credited to their many months of mutual practice together. "We really did help each other, didn't we?" Mark said, smiling as he reflected on how far they had both come since those nervous, clumsy early conversations. "We really did," Sofia agreed. Sometimes the best way to learn something difficult is finding someone else learning something equally difficult alongside you. Eventually, encouraged by their own successful experience, both Mark and Sofia began occasionally mentoring newer members within their language exchange community, patiently guiding nervous beginners through their own early, awkward conversations, exactly as Sofia had once patiently guided Mark through his own clumsy, uncertain first attempts at Spanish. Mark often found himself repeating Sofia's own advice almost word for word to these newcomers, perfect grammar can wait, but communication cannot, and every single mistake is simply proof that you're actually trying. And that's the end of today's story, the language exchange. I really like this story because it shows something meaningful. Learning a new language, or honestly any difficult new skill, often becomes much easier and more rewarding when we don't try to do it entirely alone. Before you go, think about this: have you ever helped someone learn something while they helped you learn something else in return? What did you discover about yourself during that experience? Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Anna, and this is the podcast. See you in the next episode. Take care, and keep practicing your English.